Greetings and welcome to ROI Clear. My name is Ray Hightower, and today we are honored to have as our guest Edward T. Hightower. Edward Hightower is the author of this book, Motoring Africa, which is all about building an automotive industry on the African continent. Edward is an automotive engineer, an entrepreneur, a world traveler, amongst many other things. And if his last name sounds familiar, yes, he is my brother. Please join me in welcoming Edward Hightower.
Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you for having me, Ray.
Yes, glad to have you here. Very glad to have you here. To kick us off.
Longtime fan of the show. Congratulations on the show, and thank you for honoring me by allowing me to join you today.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to honor you further by telling a story about you.
Okay.
This is a story from some years ago.
I won't have to cut you off, will I?
Well, fortunately, we're controlling who gets cut off on this end. So,
yes.
So we
there you go.
That's the advantage of controlling the microphone on this end.
That's true. That's true.
The story takes place in 1972. You and I were sitting in the back seat of our parents' automobile. Our mom and dad were sitting in the front seat. Dad was driving. We were headed westbound on 84th Street in Chicago, and coming eastbound in the opposite direction was another car, a blue car with red taillights. We saw because they came past us, and we could see the front, the side, and the back of the car as they came past us. And I looked at the car and admired it, and you looked at the car and admired it, and you said, "Oh, that's one of the new 1973 Chevrolets." And you rattled off some specifications. And I got to tell you, I didn't say anything at the time because we were very young. We were still in that sibling rivalry stage, and it was forbidden for me to give you a compliment. But I got to tell you, I was really impressed that you knew everything that you knew about that car. You knew it was a 1973 Chevrolet. You knew specs about it. And I can identify that. I can point to that as the first time that I realized that your passion for automobiles and your knowledge of autos was greater than what I saw amongst the other kids in our neighborhood. You know, we were all crazy about cars, but you were beyond that. And today, 40 years later, I just want to say I really respect the skill that you showed back in 1972. So there we go. There's your compliment.
Wow. I never knew that story. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I remembered that. So it stuck out for me. So
and by the way, all taillights are red too as well. So
well, no, the amber lights though are turn signal lights, then, right?
Those are turn signals or those are hazard lights, but the taillights are always red. But you know, I'm
so
just being
any
difficult.
light.
I'm just being difficult. I don't take the bait. I'm being difficult. But no, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
It's very
you know, it was always cars were always an interest to me, and beyond what the tail lamps look like or the headlamps or the grill, at an early age, I trained myself to know what brand car it was by the sound of its starter motor as well. Probably before I knew what a starter motor really was, I knew that that's what happened before a car started, and that was just they've just always been an interest in for me.
So when you hear the starter motor revving, you know the manufacturer, you know whether it's GM or Ford or Chrysler. You can tell.
Yeah. In the 70s, you could.
Yes.
It's a little bit different now. The industry is far more globalized. Starters are made by one company, not by several companies that sell to different brands. So it's not a thing that Mercedes would have unique to their brand, or GM or Ford would have unique to their brand, or Volkswagen may have unique to their brand. One supplier could sell to all of those manufacturers, and another supplier could sell to another group of manufacturers. So it's not as distinguishable of a feature as it was 40 years ago.
Yes. The fact that you could distinguish it then is remarkable. When did you realize that you were doing this and other people our age were not?
I never really looked at it as a comparison thing. It was just an interest of mine. And then, I found myself when we were at elementary school at Peary, whenever we had that library time, I would always gravitate towards the books about future cars. Whenever there was those get these subscriptions to magazines for 1 cent, I would try to always get Hot Rod or car for Hot Rod first, then Car and Driver and Motor Trend. And then I was really interested. I quickly flipped to the specifications about, engine displacement, number of gears in the transmission, 0 to 60 times. Those things just really were interesting to me. And, I think our parents supported that interest. And that's what young people need. They need role models and parents that support their interests. And who knows where it can take you.
We were fortunate in that, because in addition to the support of our parents, the encouragement of our parents, there was Reverend Champ.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He had his own automotive repair business that he ran in his garage. And I like to think I was helping him. I used to spend a lot of time at his garage. I think I was helping him, but I was really learning. I was really absorbing a number of things. I helped him swap transmissions in vehicles. Help, in my words.
Yes,
probably
right.
more observing. Make various repairs and maintenance items on the engines, whether it's valve seat adjustments or replacing head gaskets. And, it got to the point where oil changes were just too basic, and to the point where I didn't feel once I got to high school, I didn't feel I needed to take auto shop, because I felt I learned the basic things about, ignition timing and adjusting carburetors and changing oil and changing coolant. And, I was fortunate to have, not just Reverend Champ, but our Scoutmaster Sublette.
Yes, right.
I appointed, we had an old 1960s era International Harvester truck that we used to take out on Saturdays and collect paper, and then take to the recycling facility for money, to raise money for our troop. And, I appointed myself the head of maintenance for the truck.
At the age of 12.
Yes. Yeah. It was just an interest. And that's where I learned how to change oil. And, I learned a lot about how a stick shift works just from watching him drive it. And so those experiences as a child really are foundational to what I was able to do in the automotive industry, between 3 automakers, and what I'm doing now as an entrepreneur.
Listening to you, the big point that really jumps out at me is the value of kids being around adults that are doing something productive and sharing what they're doing with the kids that are around them, right? And
yes.
And for example, Dad made sure, Dad, of course, he was a minister, and one of the ministers he ordained was Reverend Champ, and he made sure that we had an opportunity to go around Reverend Champ. I didn't spend as much time with cars as you did. I went in a different direction, but I remember that you were always there. You were always at Reverend Champ's garage, and we were fortunate to have people like him, people like Mr. Sublette, Mr. Shackelford, Mr. Wetzel, Mr. Carter, all the way around the board, across the spectrum of people, of adults who were role models for us, as you say. And
that's true.
For me, that's especially important. With all the work that I'm doing with Boy Scouts, there's some adults who think they don't want to get involved with scouting because they don't think that they can give back. No matter where an adult is in their life, they have some skill that they can pass on to the next generation.
That's absolutely true.
And I think that is, you're a clear example of that. And you also said something, by the time you got to high school, you felt no need to take auto shop because you already knew how to adjust a carburetor. You knew about timing. You knew about tune-ups. You could change spark plugs. You could change oil. So auto shop would not have been the big challenge for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no criticism of auto shop, but I think our parents instilled us the importance of learning and growing. And you know, I just saw that I could use that time perhaps in a more productive way to learn other things. I was going to continue to stay involved with automotive through my independent learning myself, which is an important thing for young people to do. Independent learning. It's important to develop that muscle and develop that skill, because you're going to be learning your entire life, and everything doesn't happen in the classroom. Matter of fact, more learning happens outside of the classroom.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that drive to continue to learn and grow is why I say, well, you know, let me spend that time, let me earn these high school credits doing something else other than repeating some things that I think I've been doing since I was 12 or 13.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And you were fortunate to attend the best high school on the planet. In fact, I would even say in the galaxy, Lindblom Technical High School in Chicago.
102 years old. 102 years old. Yeah. 6130 South Walcott in West Inglewood.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So much history there that we got out of there. And through the activities, you know, swim team, everything, and building our technical skills. When did you decide that you wanted to study engineering in college?
You know, I think our parents always encouraged strength in the math and science disciplines. I had phenomenal math and science teachers at our elementary school, not just Peary, but Dixon as well. I remember my 7th grade math teacher, Mr. John Mosby, very well. And he was a big inspiration to me. And our introduction to physical science teacher, Mr. Floyd Eichenbauer, also a teacher at Dixon. And Dixon, like Lindblom, phenomenal public school. Peary, phenomenal public school. So I think we grew up in an era where there were phenomenal Chicago public schools that had great teachers that really cared about the young people. And I think because I did reasonably well in math and science, and I had this interest in cars, and I became interested as I would do my library time reading, as I mentioned. I think I got interested in, well, how can one have a career creating these things, making these things? And I initially thought I wanted to purely go on the manufacturing route, because I thought, well, you know, you make a car in a manufacturing plant. So I thought what I really wanted to do was manufacturing engineering or industrial engineering. And but as I learned more about how the industry worked, I learned that there's a set of work, if you will, set of functions that are involved in the planning, strategizing, designing, engineering, testing, setting specifications and requirements, and creating those products before they even get to the manufacturing plant. So that combination of strong encouragement towards math and science, becoming aware of what different careers that there are that are out there. And, you know, I didn't really have an industry role model at the time. I didn't know anyone who worked in the auto industry, but, you know, I think over time, just through reading, I would come across industry journals like, you know, Automotive News, which I read to this day. I probably started reading it in college, but I read it to this day. I was seeing if I had one near me in my office to hold one up, but they're not a sponsor, so they don't get free advertising. But
that's
you
are capitalists.
You learn from reading. I mean, reading teaches you things that you just it transports you to places where there isn't somebody to tell you how something works. You could learn about how it works. So I think as I learned about how the industry worked, I gained a greater interest and appreciation, and saw a greater fit for me on the product development side and product engineering side, which is where I spent the majority of my career when I was in the automotive industry.
I like the way you connected the dots there. There's a lot. I'll unpack a bit. Going back to reading, we got our reading foundation from our parents. You know, even now when I think of our father, when I think of Dad, when I picture him, I always see him with a book. Because he was always reading. That was his always, his thing, always doing that. And you mentioned Mr. John Mosby, math teacher. I didn't have Mr. Mosby. There were other instructors that I had, but I know that he was a very strong math teacher. You and I both had Mr. Eigenbauer for introductory physical science. Yes. I remember Mr. Eigenbauer said to us when we were in IPS, he said, by the year 1980, the United States will be on the metric system. And if someone says to you inch, you will say, what's an inch? Because you won't know what an inch is. You'll do centimeters. And here we are in the year 2021, and we're still not, well, we're partially on the metric system and some hybrid style. But it was good that that was drilled into us. And the scientific method, the ability to take you remember the sludge test where he gave us a jar? I remember the sludge test.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Baby food jar.
A baby food jar full of junk, of slop or whatever it was. Yes. And we had to use our skills, our forensic skills to figure out what was in that baby food jar.
That's right. That's right.
And that was a remarkable experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And you never know what you're going to need from your education. So it's important to try to understand and retain what you can, because, yes, the United States didn't really transition over to the metric system by 1980, but the world became more global and more interconnected. And, throughout my career in the industry, I've had the opportunity to, work in China, India, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, and many, in probably 12 countries on the African continent. And you'll find that in many other markets in the world, or many other regions of the world, metric system is prime. That's it. I mean, when I would talk to my when I was at BMW, I talked to my German colleagues. I say, okay, well, where's the meter? Where's the meeting? Where's this meeting going to be? He says, oh, you just go 4 meters this way, and then you make a left. Okay. Peter, who's he? So, I mean, I obviously remembered that. I remembered metric system because we also, when we swam, we sometimes swam in metric pools. Schools had metric pools, 25 meters and versus 25 yards or 20 yards. And in some cases, 50-meter pools. 50 meters, yes. Some cases, yes. The Olympics, the real Olympic size. So yeah, I mean, those bits of information come back and come in handy to you.
Can you say go 4 meters this way in German? Do you still remember how to say that in German?
Oh, wow.
I didn't prep you for that.
Fear is 4. Yeah, I could.
Don't worry about it.
You didn't. Fear, metro.
It's not important. It was a totally random question.
It's a test I didn't pass. Right. I'll remember it after the show.
I'm confident that you will, because you've always had a way of absorbing languages. So I know that I know.
Yeah, that. I got pretty decent in German for a while. I could get around on the subways in Munich. I would order in restaurants off of the German menu. I didn't have to say, haben Sie eine Speisekarte auf English bitte? That means, do you have an English menu, please? And, it's funny with languages, and I know you study French, so you probably would agree. If you don't use it, you kind of lose it. So,
true.
I haven't been, the last time I was in Germany was about 10 years ago. Yeah. And, but so if you're not regularly using it, you kind of lose it.
Plus, if you're immersed in it, you pick it up. The times that I've been to France, you're immersed in it and you have to use it, or you don't get to eat. Yeah, you kind of figure it out.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, Americans, we can get a little bit lazy because most places in the world, at least the language of business in many cases is English. Less so when you're in, say, China or Japan, but I mean, it's important, I think, to learn other languages and absolutely practice them,
especially now.
Yes.
You know what? That's a good segue into a discussion about your recent trip to Uganda, and some of the
Mhm.
things that you're doing with Kiira Motors. Tell us a little bit about that. Can you give us kind of an elevator pitch about what you're doing in Uganda and how they heard about you and what's going on there? Well, tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about your trip.
So I lead a firm based in the Detroit area called Motoring Ventures. Motoring Ventures is an investment growth strategy, operations and engineering consulting firm focused on the automotive industry. Our focus is creating value and impact in the automotive industry. So we work with not just major automotive OEMs or original equipment manufacturers, but suppliers to the automakers, because companies like VW, Toyota, Tesla, they don't build all of those parts themselves. They have suppliers, they have a supply chain. So we work with several of them. We work with other commercial and niche vehicle manufacturers and smaller companies to basically help them reach their full potential, help them improve their cost structure, help them develop and implement growth strategies so that their businesses are successful. And Motoring Ventures, we also work with investors in these businesses as well, helping them to evaluate companies that they're looking to invest in, or if it's a company they already own, how to help them improve their profitability, improve their performance, and really reach their full potential. The work I'm doing at Kiira Motors is it came about because, prior to the Kiira opportunity came about, I wrote a book called Motoring Africa: Sustainable Automotive Industrialization that you showed earlier. And that book is about the opportunity to develop the automotive industry on the African continent. I mentioned earlier the work I had the opportunity to do in India, China, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico. I saw the impact that those countries, as they industrialized, meaning built the capability and infrastructure to build vehicles in those countries, I saw the positive impact they had on those nations and those regions in the world. And having a long-term interest in the African continent, and having spent some time on the African continent as a grad student in the 90s, it was always an interest to me on how the African continent could build more products instead of importing. How can they build more, bring the capabilities and the skills and all of that labor that is being imported in the form of goods, how that could be used to help develop economies and drive local success.
Take control of the value chain, go from the raw materials to the finished product. Yes.
Yeah, from the raw materials to the finished product. But in addition to that, the intermediate steps as well, because there are a lot of steps between a block of copper becoming the wiring harness in a vehicle.
Right.
Because there are hundreds of wires, there are many circuits, there are many connectors. There's tons of labor in putting all of those parts together. And you know what? It has to be exactly right.
Yes.
It cannot be almost. Otherwise, the vehicle may not run. You may have an air light. You may have an airbag light. You may have a power seat that doesn't work. All of those things have to be exactly right. So there's a lot of value addition over and above the extraction of raw materials. So what I write about in my book is I use some examples of how some of those other nations in the world industrialized and localized auto production in there. I mean, I talk about, how Maruti Suzuki did so in India, how Renault is doing so in Morocco, how companies like Volkswagen, BMW, and Ford, Nissan, Toyota are doing so in South Africa. And as I was promoting the book, which was published in 2018, I learned about, or Kiira Motors learned about my book and my background, and they learned about Motoring Ventures. And we started to have a dialogue about what they were doing. Now, Kiira is a company it's a late stage startup company that is building electric city buses, and that would, think of the CTA in Chicago, that would take you on dedicated routes in the city: King Drive, State Street, Michigan Avenue, Cottage Grove, 63rd Street, going to Lindblom. And they're also in the process of building over the road diesel coach buses. Uganda is a country of about 45 million people in East Africa, with not a very well developed rail infrastructure for passengers, and not a very well developed transit system. Not a very well developed train transit system, and short haul flights are still quite expensive. So there's a significant opportunity for bus transportation. And so they're in the process of constructing their assembly plant, which will be completed this year. They have another operation where they've already started building some of the buses already in advance of the full-scale plant being completed. And they are really looking to develop into a serious OEM in East Africa, and they're on their way to doing that.
This is very inspiring. So essentially, they're going to use the electric powered buses in the cities for the short routes, and for the longer routes, they'll be using diesel, where they might not be able to charge as readily. Yes,
yeah. I mean, there's still. Exactly. That's exactly right. The charging infrastructure in most markets in the world, let alone emerging markets, is still not very well developed. And it's certainly more productive to develop charging infrastructure in dense urban areas, because the buses are within a geographically limited area.
Yes.
So say, for example, one of the things that Kiira is doing right now is one of the buses that they built is currently doing a shuttle service between the city center in Kampala and the airport in Entebbe, which is about an hour or so away. And there's charging. The bus has the capability. It's more than an hour. It's about an hour and a half away. I mean, the bus can go round trip without charging, and range anxiety is a concern with many electric vehicles. But when you're in an urban space and you're working in the commercial vehicle segment, you have the ability to put the charging infrastructure where it's needed. And the team is it's a very impressive team. The many young engineers, very bright, very capable. They've developed the software that allows you to pay for your rides with your phone. They've developed a lot of the features that are needed for some of the for the rougher roads in Uganda. I mean, there's some beautiful highways, but there's some sections where the roads are worse than they resemble the potholes you see in Chicago after the snow. It's a very capable young organization that has a very strong future, I see, going forward.
You are describing a company, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying about Kiira Motors. It sounds like they're very highly vertically integrated. They're doing the manufacturing of the buses, and they're also running routes, like you mentioned, between the city center and the airport at Entebbe. And they're writing software to accept payments. They're a very vertically integrated company.
Well, I would say in the automotive industry, you would be very vertically integrated if you're building all elements of the parts supply chain yourself.
Yeah.
And very few companies in the industry that are doing that, because we live in a connected and globalized world. Where some companies focus all on tires. Some companies focus all on printed circuit boards. Some companies focus all on LED lighting. So there's not always the advantage to build everything yourself, but they are certainly working towards being a company that has the capability to bring a lot of those skills and bring a lot of that ability to add value locally into the country. Because, you know, one of the things I say in Motoring Africa is if a nation or region can build automobiles, they could build just about anything.
Yes.
I mean, a motor vehicle is the most complex consumer product that you have that anyone would buy. You know, it has powertrain, it has a chassis system that steers and brakes the vehicle and makes it, you know, survive over rough roads. It's got a body, it's got an air conditioning system, etc. And the capabilities for all of those parts to be, you know, casted out of iron or aluminum, stamped out of steel, injected, molded in plastic, formed out of different materials, cut and sew for seats and carpet. That is transferable to other industries, whether it's medical devices, other industrials, other consumer products. So, you know, Kiira is on the path to bring as many of those skills locally as practical and as possible, and to grow from there. And, you know, several regions of the world have done this over the last 30 years.
Yes.
And I have, you know, you're not going to convince me that an African nation cannot do what India, China, South Korea, Mexico, and some of the other developing regions in the world have done just in our lifetime.
And who cares about the convincing? They're just going to execute and do it.
Right.
Just
That's
execute.
true.
Just execute.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I didn't realize until I read your book, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about automobiles over the years. I didn't realize that there were 30,000 parts in an automobile typically.
Right. Right.
That's,
yeah. I mean, when you break it down
number.
to the smallest fastener and all the way up to the largest piece of glass, there are a lot of parts. And, you know, when I was in industry, we didn't ship vehicles that were almost complete. Everything had to be there.
Yeah, right.
Had to be
there it
complete.
is. Or else the customer will complain, and you don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. Or the
Okay.
product was not going out of the door with the integrity that it needed. So
we are going to include some links to Kiira Motors and some of the other things that you referenced here, because I know that our listeners and our viewers are going to want to learn more about what you're saying, because we're like on a surface, like 40,000 foot surface reconnaissance mission right here, and some people may want to drill deeper. I want to ask a few questions about Motoring Africa.
Yes.
Your focus is, I love the way you did you did the metaphor. On your first visit to Ghana, there were some issues with the landlines that are in place, but on subsequent trips, like especially once you started going in there in the early 2000s, going to Ghana in the early 2000s, everybody had wireless phones. Everyone had cell phones. And there were so many places on the continent, you know, that where they skipped over landlines and went straight to wireless phones. And it just made sense. Why go through the headaches of dealing with laying out copper if you can go straight to wire? And that's what you're doing with this book. You are going, instead of going through internal combustion engines, granted, Kiira's doing the diesel engines, and it makes sense to do that for the application that you described, the long distance runs there. But you're going in and you're describing how to build an automotive industry that's all EVs. What made you decide to go straight to EVs? Was it that you wanted to pattern the new industry after what happened with cell phones, or were there some other motivations there?
Well, developing an industry takes a lot of time, and it's fairly capital intensive. In the early 90s, China built about 500,000 vehicles per year. By 2017, they were just under 30 million per year. So
from 500,000 to 30 million. Yeah. Okay.
30
yes.
million. Yes.
60x,
So in that 30-year period, 60x increase. there's a fair amount of capital required for that. So one of the points I make in Motoring Africa and the recommendation to focus on EVs is that you want to industrialize towards where the industry is going, not to where the industry was.
Yeah.
There will still be, I mean, electric vehicles still represent less than 5% of the market in the United States, and probably close to that globally.
Right.
But we're at a tipping point in 2021 with many more models coming on board, more and more countries and cities saying they're going to restrict the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, and them becoming a better proposition for the consumers. There was some research that came out just last month that studied EV buyers, and almost all of them said they don't want to go back to internal combustion. If they've been an EV buyer,
yes.
they don't want to go back.
Right.
The other thing, you have to follow where the customer is. You can't run a business at war with your customer.
Mm-hmm.
But the other reason why this segment is going to, or the product category of electric vehicles is expected to grow, is that the cost is continuing to go down. The cost of batteries on a dollars per kilowatt hour is continuing to go down. So the crossover point, or the price premium that you need to pay to move from an internal combustion engine vehicle to an electric vehicle, is close to being on par.
Yes.
We're within 5 years of them being on par. The opportunity on the African continent is really a story about growth. And, with many of the growing markets, emerging markets in Asia slowing down, businesses of all types, not just automotive, are looking for where's the next growth market. And one of the things I talk about in the African continent and in Motoring Africa is that the African continent is scheduled is forecasted to double in population, from about 1.3 billion people to 2.5 billion people by 2050.
Mm-hmm.
By 2035, 14 years from now, they'll have a larger workforce. The African continent will have a larger workforce than India or China.
And a younger workforce too. Younger,
yes,
the age demographics as well. Yes.
Yeah, younger workforce. I'm not sure what I said. I meant to say younger. They'll have a larger and younger.
Workforce.
Yes, they'll have a larger workforce because the average population is younger. So there'll be more people that are within those working ages of, call it, 16 to 50, 55, 60. There will be a larger percentage of the population that are of working age than any other place in the world. Also, there's forecasted growth in the middle class, and as more people earn more income, they want to buy more stuff, more things, and one of those things they want to buy is not only homes but vehicles and personal mobility. And when you couple that with an emerging trend in the auto industry of not just electrification, not just connectivity and ability to connect your phone to your vehicle, and not just autonomy, but the shared economy. Companies like Uber or Ola in India are making personalized transportation more accessible to more people. And those vehicles still have to be built somewhere. So why continue to import vehicles at an outsized a percentage into the continent versus building the capability to make locally? I mean, my favorite statistic on this is, the African continent is about 17.5% of the world's population. So you're looking at about 1.3 billion people.
Right.
But in total, they produce about 1.2, 1.3 million vehicles. Globally, there are about 97 million vehicles produced per year. It's down last year a bit because of COVID, but let's just say round numbers, 100 billion.
Yeah.
100 million. So 17.5% of the world's population producing 1% of the world's vehicles. There's an opportunity there.
Yes, huge opportunity.
To China, China. Earlier, I said they went from 500,000 to 30 million. Okay, similar population of the country of China to the continent of Africa, 1.3 billion people producing 30% of the world's vehicles.
Right.
So do you want to be producing 1% or do you want to be producing 30%? If you could get anywhere closer from 1% to 30%, you're creating significant opportunities for jobs, economic development, skills transfer, and improving the lives and standards of living, and quite frankly, stability of various regions and the lives for many people.
True. Yeah, I've always believed that if people are doing business with each other and they have business relationships where everybody's winning, there's no reason to go to war.
Right.
Or you at least drastically reduce the reason to go to war, and you also increase the incentive to dissipate any skirmishes that might kick off. So yeah, I like that.
Right. Right.
And what you described, we've seen this movie before. We saw this, you and I grew up watching Japanese cars going from, oh, haha, it's a Japanese car, to seeing them become very respected Japanese cars, right? We've seen this movie before in our lifetime. And so it can happen again here. And you're taking elements from history and you're blending them with what you know about science and engineering and leadership, and you've laid out a strategy for moving forward. So there it is.
Yeah, and even more recent with South Korea.
Yes.
In the 90s, even in the 90s, more recent.
Right. Hyundai. Yes.
Hyundai was considered.
Did I say it wrong? Is it Hyundai or Hyundai?
I've heard it both ways.
Okay.
But they were towards the bottom of most quality surveys and metrics. But now they're at the top. Now they're at the top.
Okay.
Hyundai, Kia, and they're getting heavily into electrification, and they've also shown success at industrializing in emerging markets. I remember when they introduced their first SUV in India. I happened to be in India on that day. It was of February back in 2015. It was a vehicle called the Creta. And they introduced it there with a big billboards all over. I was in the city of Bangalore at the time. Cities all over the place saying the world's best SUV.
Wow.
Very bold statement.
Yes.
But what was interesting is they didn't just bring the vehicle there and sell it. They built a plant there. They built a plant in the country, and they brought many of their suppliers along with them.
Right.
Many of the suppliers from South Korea came with India because they realized if they were building more parts locally that went into this world's best SUV, and more people locally were employed building parts for that world's best SUV, more people could, guess what? Buy that world's best SUV right in that market. So there's a direct correlation between level of employment and people that can actually buy your product or your service. So I think when you look at entering a market, there's always a value of being able to produce where as close to your customer as you can.
Yeah, Henry Ford proved that over 100 years ago, didn't he? So there it is.
He did.
We are, I could talk to you about this for a long time. We always get deep, and we're running towards the end of our time right here. And there's a couple of questions I want to ask you that I ask all of our guests.
Okay.
One I will ask you is, if time travel were possible, which it's not, but if you could send a message back to your 20-year-old self, your 30-year-old self, and your 40-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself back then?
I think it would be, it's important to educate yourself. It's important to develop a skill. It's important to have a passion, but business relationships matter. Business relationships are very important. No major project gets done individually or by yourself. It's important to bring the right people onto your team And that it's important to continue to build business relationships and professional relationships throughout your career.
And that is advice.
I don't think I knew that in my 20s, I would say.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is, the 20s, I think for a lot of us are, hey, I'm a rugged individualist and I'm going to get this done.
Yeah. And man, I think our school system really pushes just individual outcome and individual, I don't want to say individual achievement, because I don't know if a grade alone is just an achievement, but individual metrics, individual measures, or individual contributions. But, most major things are done as teams. So I think the earlier you can learn how to work together in teams, I think that was one thing that business school really emphasized well for me, is that so much was group projects. And so much was managing dynamics of your team and the person who didn't pull their weight versus the person who wanted to dominate the discussion. And all of those dynamics are just things that happen in reality. But building those relationships and building business relationships and being able to work on teams is an important one.
Excellent. Final question. You're an author. What are you reading now? What books are you reading now, or what books would you recommend that you've read recently? What books would you recommend to our audience, or what have you read that impresses you?
I was just on a webinar where the guest was Fareed Zakaria.
Yes.
Just before this, like an hour before this. And he has a new book called 10 Lessons Post the Pandemic. I may get the title a little bit off, but I plan on taking that on next, because that really talks about the changes that are going to impact the world as a result of as we move out of COVID-19. But one that I recently completed that I really liked was a book called Who Not How.
Yes.
And it's really about how you shouldn't always focus on how to get a difficult problem done, but who can help you get that difficult problem done, or who could help you meet that objective, or who could help you make that connection, if you will. So kind of goes back to the question you asked earlier about the importance of business relationships. Who Not How really puts it in practical terms, and how to select those people to be part of your team, part of your circle, to get the big things you want to get done.
Excellent. That's a perfect way to end our discussion. Edward T. Hightower, thank you so much for being with us here.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure, and I'll continue to be a fan of the show.
And thank you for engaging the ROI Clear podcast. At ROI Clear, we buy multifamily apartment properties, we improve them, and we give people a great place to live. At the same time, we give investors an opportunity to enjoy capital preservation, tax advantages, and a solid return on investment. If you'd like to know more, click the link to roiclear.com down below. We look forward to speaking with you.